What's going on, everybody? Hell Jabronies. Another Thursday night. Let's see who's here in the chat so far. We have Kyle Cluckin. Quite the name. Cheers. Thanks for being here. We have Amazing Gaming Productions. As always, thank you for being here. And Katie did. What's going on? All right. So, first thing I want to talk about a little bit before we dive into the Frank Miller discussion, which it does ultimately tie into the Frank Miller discussion quite nicely. But there's last week we talked about marketing and about some of these what seem like self-proclaimed marketing experts on Twitter and on YouTube, and how they just keep providing all this surface level, in my opinion, hibbity jibbity around marketing. A lot of just common sense stuff. And this week it seems like they're kind of shifting some of that towards, well, people are just lazy, and you need to market, you need to make your book marketable. Like, essentially, that's got to be your focus before you start considering what you're gonna do. You have to think, oh, is it marketable versus, hey, I have this idea, I have this story, I love it, like I know I can, it'll be the best story I can make. And then figuring out a way to market it. It's, oh well, I don't know, is it does it have boobs, right? Does it have, some of the, does it check the boxes to make it super, I don't know, marketable on Kickstarter or whatever. And I think there are too many new creators that are coming into the space, basically just copying and pasting what other people are doing on Kickstarter, Indiegogo, because their focus is, right, how much money they can raise versus how do I make the best book possible based on my storytelling ability, my skills, right, the artists that I can hire. And I think a lot of folks end up getting burnt out because of that. They may raise some money, but I think they're limiting their potential in their ability to raise funds because they're not making unique stories, right? It's just, you could find 100 other projects just like what some of these folks are making, and then they'll say, oh, but I made 10, 20,000, and I just keep doing that over and over again, but I'm not growing. But I'm awesome at marketing because look, I'm making 10 or $20,000. It's like, well, but why aren't you growing over time? Why aren't you making 30, 40, 50? Why is your art not improving on your books? Why do the books just continue to look like the same type of book? And why are there, again, a bunch of other ones just like that on these crowdfunding sites? So I want to open up a tweet that I had posted today regarding that. All right. We also have Stray Beans, Miller Time. That's right. It's always Miller Time. Comes to comics. So I have Mikey Guts. LBA just found out Eric blocked me today for adding him. I wasn't even disrespectful, but he can take criticism. Yeah, that happens to a lot of people. I would wear that like a badge of honor, pretty much. All right, let's see here. Becomes so difficult to present and share stuff on StreamYard since last year. There we go. All right. So I posted this tweet today where I said, I keep seeing all these posts about how you need to create books that are marketable and that not every book needs to be deep, right? Or try to move the needle or, whatever half baked phrase that you want to pull out of your ass, essentially. And I said, this is how crowdfunding site algorithms get consumed by generic books and not for safe, not, safe for work slop, because that's on Kickstarter, it's in abundance. And I'm not saying like all, not safe for work books are slop, but a good chunk of them appear to be that way on Kickstarter. It's just the same in your face, over the top covers of just boobs or whatever, And then the interiors don't match the quality of the exteriors, and in a lot of cases it's just like, oh, it's just an existing property, but we've changed the genders and just threw these oversized boobs in your face, and it's like, yeah, really creative. Like, yeah, sex sells. Shocker. Like, hmm, obviously this is a known thing, but it does not give any hints towards, is it even a worthy story? Is the art any good on the inside? Because all of the marketing focus tends to be like, hey, look at the cover and just the cover. And I said that's how the market also gets flooded with new creators that see, oh, that person made $20,000 with that mediocre level of art and just tossing, again, cartoon boobs in people's faces. And they think, oh, that's a lot of money. And I do that 5 times a year, right? I'm making 6 figures, and they neglect to realize or learn from these marketing gurus. You're only getting a percentage of that. If you're lucky, you're retaining 50% margins, maybe 40. You're doing really well, but a lot of first time creators, right? Maybe they retain 10, 20, at best 30% margins. So yeah, after you take into account shipping and everything, paying for all your art, you might walk away with what, $5 to $8,000. That's something, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely going to burst a lot of bubbles of people that come into the space thinking it's $20,000, right? Cash. Because some people just are a bit oblivious to the breakdown of what those funds end up being. So I do think there's a lot of people that just come into the space and just see the dollar signs, and they're like, I'm just going to make a book just like that. Right? I'm just going to copy another property and sexualize it, and boom, I'm going to make money. And then again, there's 100 more people doing the same shit. It's just like all the people trying to copy all the rage bait YouTubers, right? They do the same type of jokes, they do the same cringe thumbnails, the same complaints about the same movies over and over, and there's 100 copycats. And they all assume they can make FNT money or whatever, right? But extremely unlikely. They might get a couple pennies from YouTube, but that's about it. Um, so continue on. I said, how about just letting your passion drive you? Create a story that you love with art that makes you feel something, right? Like what Frank Miller constantly achieves, and then find a way to market it. The thing is, any book can be marketed, whether it's niche or not. You just have to find out where that niche audience is, right? Whether it's on social media, whether it's on YouTube, you just have to find that audience. And the thing is, there are plenty of people willing to buy books that are not NSFW, right? There are, doesn't matter what genre you do, you can find an audience. You can also make an audience. How? By being able to pitch your book and display your art in a manner that will intrigue people. Good example, Mike Barron, his the Western book that he did. I'm drawing a blank right now on the name, but I'm typically not a fan of Westerns. I grew up watching a ton of Westerns. I think I got burnt out as a kid because my dad and my grandparents just constantly watched, um, John Wayne films, for example. And so I really am not interested in them. But because Mike is such a great writer, I figured, you know what? I'll give this one a shot. I picked it up, and it was fantastic. He was able to merge supernatural themes into a Western, and the writing carried it all the way through to make it interesting for someone like me. So, again, if you can display some fantastic art and have a great pitch, you can create your own audience, especially if the art is fantastic, right? There are some artists out there where you're just like, I don't care what the genre is, I don't care what the theme is. The art is just so wonderful. I'm going to pick it up. in my opinion, Frank Miller is one of those guys, right? Like Sin City wouldn't necessarily appeal to certain people, right? Because it's a little over the top. It is, it is not safe for work, right? And all that, but the art is so intriguing, and his ability to tell a story, just it makes you want to get every book that he's ever written. Um, so I think if more creators just found a story, created characters that they're truly passionate about, it's going to make marketing it way easier than like, oh yeah, the story, yeah, look at the boobs, look at this, like, and then it's like, okay, what else? Well, it's cool, like it's got great art. Their pitch is going to fall apart because the passion is not there. They can't sit there and talk about their story or their characters, for like an hour, for example, because they love it so much that the readers are gonna see through that, some of them, and they're gonna say, "This is really surface level, like, I kinda wanna invest my money in something that's, gonna wow me a bit more," right? Yeah, don't get me wrong, there's some people that just want the cheesecake stuff and like, "Oh, it's cool, it's goofy, I'll buy it." But if you want to garner new backers and get interest in a wider audience, you've gotta be passionate about what you're creating. You gotta be able to talk about it, you gotta be able to sell it. You know, if you're not, it's hard to sell something that you don't believe in. Um, Even if you just believe in the money that you want to make. So just said, passion is is greater than surface level marketing tactics. Quality obviously is greater than quantity. You know, quit listening to these screechers proclaiming that marketing and the algorithm are king. Listen to those who respect and love the craft, putting art and quality above all else. There's a reason why Moore and Miller are legends, and it ain't because of their marketing skills or their ability to write a tweet filled with empty mental calories. Now, yes, they were in a nice position to where, right, they're working for publishers that do all the marketing and all that. That's a given. But they also could have taken the easy route, right? Written a Superman or Batman story that has always been marketable, you know, doesn't push the boundaries, something that's comfortable, right? That would be very easy. They would have made their money, they would have still got their sales, but both of them cared about their stories and their characters so much that they were willing to push the boundaries. They were willing to take the risk because they didn't know, like Frank didn't know that Sin City was going to be a smash hit. And I don't think, I think part of his struggle was that he couldn't get possibly the big two to pick it up because it was, again, so dark, so gritty, so gray. Um, I'm sure they're regretting that now, right? But that's the thing. He took that risk. He was just all about the art form, all about the story, and the same with Moore. And that's why they're now legends, not because they tried to just stay with the grain, do what's comfortable, do what's marketable. They created something that ended up being beyond marketable and beyond successful because they gave so much of a shit about what they were doing. And I think we need more people like that, especially in the indie space. That's how people break out of the indies, is by doing that. We also have Mr. Corey Barton. How's it going, man? Again, there's an indie guy there that's passionate about the work that he does, about the books that he and his brother have created so far. And, like Berserk, for example, I know he absolutely loves that. I bet you he could talk about that for hours. And I can tell that that inspires him. He's not just making generic books because he gives a shit. Trey Bean says, let's be honest, the only legit marketing advice that they could offer is get angry about woke shit. Yeah, and that's what some of them do, right? They just pitch it as anti woke or whatnot, but there's no substance to that. There isn't. Some of the greatest creators are woke, right? It's just whether or not they formulate their stories and their characters around that. and most of them don't. The ones that are truly masters of their craft. Doesn't matter how right wing or left wing they know how to tell a story and they know how to maybe like inject small doses of their political beliefs right into books without making it the main focus and driving a good chunk of the market or the audience away. Mikey says the movie made me mad for Nancy showing boobs. Yeah, that's funny. Mark Miller, the other Miller, is an amazing marketer. He's great at selling an elevator pitch. Yep, and he's also a guy. He doesn't necessarily make books that are just towing the line, right? That go along with just standard superhero or standard genre titles. He does also very dark and even disturbing projects, and so I think he's more in line with Frank and Alan on he writes what he is passionate about, but he knows it so well and he is so passionate about it that he was able to market it. He was able to pitch it, his stuff to Netflix, to Dark Horse or whoever, and again, progress over time. If he would have just taken the easy route, right, and done, let's say, cheesecake books, he wouldn't be where he's at right now. But he took the risks and it paid off. Mhm, mhm. Yep, yeah, it's all about there being substance to the books, absolutely. Oh, what's going on, Eric? Thanks for being here, man. So, yeah, I mean, that's where, this ties into, again, Frank and how he just was willing to take risks and look at where he's at today because of it. Even though, right, his art style, for example, isn't everyone's cup of tea, everybody everybody knows it. It sticks out, um, and he's always going to be respected for it. Even if you're not a fan of his art. And that's the key thing there is it's not just creating what you're passionate about. It's about having an approach that is focusing on something that's unique and new. You could be super passionate, of course, about Superman and then just create basically another Superman with a different name. Um, Maybe it'll be a great story, but it's going to be hard to market that if it's just a very clear copy and paste. So that's where we need a lot more of the just creativity to be like, hey, I'm going to create something that maybe has some aspects, some shared abilities or something with Superman, but give him unique traits, give him a unique look, and put him in unique situations to where people can't just be like, oh, it's Superman. Because, yeah, that gets very boring in the mainstream and in indies. Um, I don't know how many times I've seen just, hey, it's just another Flash with a different name in crowdfunding or Spider-Man. It's just like, come on. Like, how do you expect to get anywhere in the space if you can't come up with a unique character design? Even if you can't draw yourself, like you should be able to team up with an artist that can come up with some character designs. Lean into their creativity as well. But yeah, it's just there's way too many just generic copycat creations out there in the indie space. There's also too many gimmick books as well. Like, oh, it's Super Mario Brothers, but they're chicks with huge jugs. Huh. I'm sure a lot of thought went into that. Uh, don't worry, it's my disguise. My disguise of getting older and my vision not being so great. Eric says, Many, Superman with another name characters have been made in the last 90 years. Yep, exactly. And again, that's what's so great about people like Miller and Moore, right? Like Sin City, it's not a Superman, it's not a superhero book, right? It's morally gray characters in a shit city taking down, right, the worst of the worst. Um, they do heroic acts, but you're not going to essentially put them on a pedestal, but you're definitely going to be entertained by what they do, and you're going to be happy with what they do. But you're not going to walk away being like, "Oh, I want to be like him." Like maybe certain aspects, but they're not being glorified in the way that a Superman would, for example. Yeah, yeah, we're seeing that now too. Uh, that's funny. So let's talk about Frank Miller's writing. Um, so I would hope everyone's wrote read something by Miller at this point, at least Dark Knight Returns, right? Sin City, Daredevil, 300, right? Those are the Ronin, those are some of the most well-known books by him. But the thing that I love about his writing is that it's extremely punchy and witty, versus like someone like Moore, he's a lot more poetic, right? A lot more elegant, which is very fitting for like Swamp Thing, Watchmen, right? Things that have more of a political twist to things. But Frank's work it's suitable for, right, the average Joe, and I think a lot of his characters average Joes would relate to, especially in like Sin City, right, and like the vices of the characters and things that they experience, the things that are going on in their heads. And like the one thing with Sin City, for example, especially a lot of this, let's say, scenes or the panels with Miho, right? Like he did such a good job injecting slight humor in it. Um, in such gray and bloody scenarios. But again, there was just well placed humor and just wittiness throughout his books. And he knew how to say a lot with a little and to make words really impactful. Whether it was a fight scene or whatever, like he made every word count. And the biggest thing that helped me connect to his writing was his use of inner monologue. Initially, especially in Dark Knight Returns. One thing with let's say most superhero books, right? It's more of the art and the dialogue helping you get a feel for the character, let's say. But with Frank's work, he is actually using that inner monologue constantly, especially again in the Dark Knight books and in Sin City, to where you know exactly what the character is thinking, what he's feeling as he's being punched, as he's feeling pain. And he uses very fluid and very descriptive words to emphasize those feelings and those emotions, sensations, right? Like I think it was one of the Sin City books where he like gets punched in the gut and he's like, it was like an atom bomb went off in my stomach, right? Like just ways to like really make that inner dialogue just stick and make you feel like you're in the book, like you're in that character's mind, in his shoes. So his ability to do that for me is just like unlike any other writer. And that really connected with me because that's how I want my character to be portrayed. And that's what I tried to do in the novels, like really help the reader get inside the mind in the shoes of my character so that you feel like you're right going through the journey with the character and also so that you can relate with the character. And Dark Knight Returns was just so phenomenal with, again, you really understood why Batman or Bruce Wayne was doing what he was doing. You understood how his past impacted his present and his outlook for the future and what he wanted to accomplish. Because again, you were in his mind so much with that inner monologue that you just really understood the character versus some of the superhero books where it's very surface level and you're trying to piece it together with dialogue and the art. Frank did a really good job of utilizing his words but then marrying it with the art. And his art and his use of dialogue and inner monologue, just they're so compatible. And I think that's obviously the advantage of having a writer that can also draw, right? Is they just know exactly how to pull those two together. Because a writer and an artist are not always going to be on the same page because they're not in the same mind, right? And so there's going to be compromises that happen along the way, whether it's with the script, with the art, right? You name it. And Dark Knight Returns just did such a good job in capturing realism in a nice way. It really did a good job making the media just look like despicable pieces of shit, which is relatable because that's modern day, right? Media for the most part. And so his art just was so good at making villains ugly and detestable looking, and making the heroes look strong and masculine and just heroic. Especially with how he had, Batman look, right? And that's why part of why I loved Snyder's depiction of Batman. Right, he was just really bulky, blocky, but defined enough, especially with the suit, to be like, yeah, that's a powerful, scary looking vigilante. With the Nolan verse, like I do think that casting was fantastic. Bale was, cut, had some muscle, but he didn't have that presence. You know what I mean? Whether it was the costume design or just again that bulkiness really adds to that intimidation factor. And I think with the new Reacher TV show, right, having Alan Ritchson, who's just freaking huge, right, that just adds to that intimidation factor. And again, Batman's goal of instilling fear into criminals. Um, and that's why I think having a Superman also that's super jacked and intimidating is so important, especially in film. And that's why for me, Cavill versus like Corn Sweet is just like it's night and day. Like Corn Sweet does not look impressive. It doesn't look super. But again, Miller did a good job making Batman look almost inhuman in a way. Trying to find some of the more like the splash pages to show that. But yeah, he did just such a good job with the design of Batman. But yeah, like this. It's obviously an iconic shot there. Just like and what I love about that shot too is that also depicts how much Batman loved doing what he did, right? Like it was his playground, beating up criminals, hunting them down, like, and that's what I loved about his depiction too, is even though he was in like agonizing pain so much, right? And even suffering mentally to an extent, like there were these little like spurts of him just like, oh, I love this. I'm so glad to be back in the saddle. Like this is what I'm meant to do. Like that's what you need to hear from a superhero and from a vigilante that they do have love for what they do, right? There's meaning to it. Um, yeah, he did a really good job in just depicting Batman, in my opinion. And he did a good job too with Superman. Like, yeah, Superman doesn't look like you know a pretty boy, let's say, like he would in most adaptations, but he was definitely jacked and had presence. So I thought he did a really good job with Superman in that. And one of the things we'll look at in a bit was they actually Miller and Snyder like interviewed each other. It was like 6 months ago or something like that, and they talk about deconstruction, reconstruction, and all that. And I really appreciate it. And for folks that want to hear a little bit more deeper dive into Dark Knight Returns, I do have a review in my review playlist of it. But I really liked how he broke out of the stereotypical or standard approach towards Superman, right? Of just, right, yeah, he's a Boy Scout, but he's always doing what's right. In this depiction, I was like, yeah, he's a Boy Scout, but he's also a lapdog to the government. And throughout the series, it was great to see Superman go from being kind of naive, like people are with the government, right? Blindly following politicians, and to show that, like, hey, even Superman can be gullible. Even Superman can make the wrong decisions. But over time, he realizes, like, hey, I have to think for myself. I can't be the government's bitch, right? I'm bigger than that. I'm better than that. And I really appreciated that he broke down Superman in that way to where it's like, man, Superman was annoying in Dark Knight Returns. Like you wanted Batman to beat the snot out of him because he's just naive. It just reminds you of these people that just simp for the government, right? Even when they do the worst things, like, oh yeah, they're just going to blindly follow him. But Frank did a really good job of just showing that arc of him being naive to realizing, like, oh, yeah, being manipulated to like, hey, I need to think for myself, and I'm a damn superhero. I need to be super and not be basically a slave to humans that are corrupt, right? So yeah, let's check in with the chat here. Ooh, let's see. Kyle says, wasn't the female version of the Mario Brothers the Gianna sisters or something like that? That I'm not sure. I don't know if there was ever any works tied to the actual properties, but we've seen kind of some knockoffs in crowdfunding, unfortunately. Uh, Headless Bourgeois says Miller never settled into a fixed style. He did what he wanted when he wanted, and that was a big part of what made following his works over the years so much fun. Yeah, for sure, right? Even Dark Knight, Returns versus Sin City, they're substantially different in art style. And like for me, I love the black and white and the heavy inks of Sin City, but they both serve the purpose of the story and the characters. And I like again that he changed his art style to fit the characters, to fit the genre, to fit the kind of the style of the story. What's going on, man? Thanks for being here. That's what we need, right? More passion, not just more fun in comics, right? If you're passionate about your books and you love them, you're gonna have fun. If you're not having fun, something's missing. And it's not just the money. I can't believe that. Oh, it's closing tonight. I didn't know that. Yeah, definitely everybody. We've checked this out a couple times over the last month, but definitely go back Heat Punk before it closes out. Definitely. Eric says I have Dark Knight Returns and several of his Daredevil trades. Never read Sin City or 300. Yeah, Daredevil. I just went through Born Again recently again, and it was such a great read. Um, but for me, Dark Knight Returns, that all the Dark Knight books, and then yeah, Sin City are cream of the crop for me. Sin City, I highly recommend. It's so damn good. And then I mean, you can even you've probably already seen the films, but it's almost you know, reading them after watching the films is like it's so awesome because the casting was done so well that when you read the book after the movie, you can just play it out in those voices of like Josh Brolin, right, and whatnot, and it's just so perfect. Yeah. for sure. Yep. And anyone that hasn't seen Sin City movies or 300 definitely need to. And that's the thing with Frank too is that because of how he writes his stories, they're perfect for being adapted into films. Like you can literally just take right the panels, the dialogue, everything right from the page and put it right in the movie. Um, 300, obviously, perfect example. The Sin City films. How Zach was able to pull from his works into Batman vs Superman and Justice League. Like we need more. Well, I hate to say. Well, we need more films based on Frank's books, but not with the talent that has been shitting out comic book, book films lately. So 10 years ago, 20 years ago, hell yeah. But now it's like, are they actually gonna put the right crew together, right? But again, Snyder, in my opinion, Robert Rodriguez, like those are folks that really love and respect comics, and I think they do them justice, right? Nolan as well, for sure. Hmm. Absolutely. Yes, his books are definitely cinematic, but I don't think he ever split up a two-page spread. I don't think he was that much of a visionary, right? The other thing too about him, at least from a writing perspective, right, he's very versatile. Being able to go from like Dark Knight Returns, which is to me like kind of middle of the road of dark and gritty, um, to Sin City, right? Really great characters, very dark, very gritty, very bloody, very brutal, and then to a character like Daredevil that is right a little bit brutal, but really tries to right obviously not kill, and a lot more of a let's say a gentle vigilante. Um, again, very versatile in being able to have like a more emotional story to a more brutal and bloody story, and also right jumping from like let's say more of a pulp, urban setting to more of a mythological or you know really old history storytelling type book, but he's just extremely versatile, and that's just again him, Miller as well. But yeah, that's one thing about him that just makes all of his books just so wonderful to read. Is it's got something for pretty much anybody. But I'd say he does specialize in the gray, the gritty, and the bloody, which is my cup of tea. So, oh, one thing too I love about his work is that he does more long form inner monologue. Let me find an example of this. Does it in pretty much every Sin City book. Mm, yeah, like this. And he usually does like at least one per chapter, right? Where he has like an entire like vertical strip of internal monologue. And there's people like Moore, for example, with Watchmen. Like I appreciated that he actually had prose pages, right, sprinkled throughout the book. It helped with changing the pace, helped to really learn the background and more context, learn more context about the characters. Whereas Frank, he did have like a prose form intro to Dark Knight Returns, which I thought was great. But in like Sin City, he does that long form inner monologue to again help you really get an understanding of the character, give backstory, right? Give more motivation, just really help you connect and understand the character more. And I wish more books did that because again, there's so many of the, especially superhero books, right? They're so fast paced, and you're just like jumping basically through it. That I don't know, it doesn't slow down enough to really connect with the character and just get that impact that you want from a book, that wow factor, but in the form of words. And Frank does such a good job with that. And so it really helps you understand his characters. And so that's another reason, I think, writers especially need to read Sin City, is to just at least get exposed to that form of inner monologue and the way that he writes, because it may be suitable for you as a writer. I know for me, it absolutely is, right? As a prose writer, right, I'm constantly thinking, like, should I toss a couple prose pages into the comic that I'm working on? It's like, I don't know. I'm constantly flirting with the idea, but the long form inner monologue is perfect, right? It doesn't take up a ton of space, but it gives you that ability to, again, give some backstory, dive into some of the character motivations, and just learn about them, because that's a fear, you know, of mine as a writer, is that it's going to be too fast paced, or that it's going to be too surface level to where the reader doesn't connect or learn enough about the character, because you only have so many pages. There's only so much real estate due to the cost of making a comic, that you don't want to miss out on giving the reader a chance to connect with each character and each point of view, even. Um, so that's one of my focuses, is just make sure I get enough, information, so that you can make sure the characters are three dimensional, make sure that the reader understands the motivation of all the major characters, and to make sure there's some backstory, um, to these characters as well. So yeah, that's, like, just absolutely why I love his writing. And again, his art, it's an acquired taste in a way, but like for me, when I first read Dark Knight Returns, that was the first Miller book I read. At first, the art was jarring. I was just like, "Whoa, this is strange," right? Compared to, right, Keown and Byrne, you know, all the well known artists, to where you're just like, hmm. But once you get into the writing and you start getting connected with the story, it just flows so well, and you're like, I get it now. This is his art is such a good fit for the story. Again, once you started witnessing, right, the media personalities and just how ugly they looked, you're just like, that's perfect. And then you saw Batman, and just how raw he looked, how just how much of a presence he had, right? Just how dark he looked. You're like, yep, I get it now. And then you just fall in love with his art style. And Sin City is the same way, with the heavy blacks, and with it being black and white, and just the setting of Basin City. Like, just like, yeah, it's perfect. And that's why Robert Rodriguez for the films was just, man, that was beautiful how he did that black and white and grayscale, but then did splashes of color, right? For blood, for shoes, for the yellow bastard. Like, it just really had that noir feeling. So, um, but yeah, I liked how his art was raw. It's gritty, it's blocky, and it's just so heavy on the inks. And obviously, from my like black and white cover that Joe did, like, I really like artwork that can be presented as just a black and white, that can just be heavy on the inks. And so that's why, you know, I'm gonna make sure I have a black and white version that someone can read after or even before the colored version, and be like, wow, that's a different feel. Like, I'm so glad I got both. Um, I really appreciate our, artists that can give you that impact in a different color scale, essentially. All right. So next thing I wanted to do was actually EFAP a interview, on YouTube, of Frank Miller's. Now, hopefully there won't be any copyright issues, right? We're just going to be commentating on it, discussing it, but the purpose of it is to, right, just talk about it with the chat. So hopefully there won't be any issues. But this was an interview I watched not too long ago that was just wasn't too long, but was just very, very, very cool. And I think it'll bring up a lot of different topics that we can expand on. So let me pull this up. And it's an older one, so like the quality is just naturally not going to be great. Like it's an old interview, probably from the 80s or 90s, probably 90s. So, all right, let's pull this up. Let me know if there's any issues with the sound. Actually, let's take a look at Frank's site here, so we can take a look at again just some of his art. Obviously, he's got some Wolverine pieces that are really really dope as well. This I love this piece. That's such a cool Wolverine piece. Just yeah, the heavy, just black everywhere. Classic Sin City piece there of Marv. And again, that was another character that was just you know in the book, in the movie, just so blocky, so bulky and intimidating looking. It was just such a great character design. And I loved how his chapter breaks. Like he would have like art like this that would be like a silhouette or whatnot. It was just so cool. Such an awesome piece. Obviously, iconic one like this. Everybody knows this one. But yeah, just such a unique and awesome art style. Let's get into this interview here. Okay, let's see. And Mikey says, knowing him more, hates Rorschach. I find him retarded. I don't know anyone who doesn't like him. Yeah, I mean, thing is, I don't really. That doesn't necessarily bother me. Just like finding out what someone's politics are or whatnot. It's just doesn't matter what they intended a character to be like or whatnot. It's just like the way that it came out and that I interpreted it is just so awesome. That's like all that stuff is just noise to me. Um, just his writing is so good that it doesn't matter what I hear about him or beliefs or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's about his art and what he's done. So. Hmm. All right, let's check this out.
I think the crudest possible way to put how I've organized my career is I've been led by my dick. I started drawing when I was a very, very young child. I presented my mother with a pile of typewriter paper that had been folded over, covered with drawings, saying, "This is what I'm doing for the rest of my life," when I was 6 years old. Drawing has always been part of who I am. And New York has always been an inspiration, even though I was a country kid. And I always knew this would be my home. And I couldn't wait to draw it for real. When I first moved here, I couldn't afford to go to the movies. I couldn't afford a lot of things.
Makes sense why he was a perfect fit for Daredevil. He probably knew the city so well that he could depict it even better than most artists, and also tie that into the character story.
So I would go up to the top of the Empire State Building, and they had no screens up. So I could actually sit on the edge of the Empire State Building and draw. Then I would go out to South Street Seaport, and I would draw again. And it all represented a breathing, living city. The city is a very vertical place. And as a cartoonist, you tend more to play with vertical shapes. The water tanks and everything are resting on very high spaces, and people live on top of each other in womb-like environments. So the city lends itself to long brush strokes, whereas the country or mythical lands tend to be much more horizontal. That's why when I did 300, for instance, I went for a horizontal format. And I knew that spectacle is something that you experience as a human being this way, whereas the city is something you tend to experience this way. I've devoted a lot of my career to capturing it because it is alive. Every inch of it's alive. Let's get back to Max Gaines. They created the half tab, as it's called.
Yeah, it's so not just inspiring, but invigorating to hear someone like Miller talk like this, right? And we do see some folks in the indie space that are, obviously artists that speak in such a manner, but you can just tell that it goes beyond just creating a cool book, right? Or wanting to become famous for a book. Like they analyze every aspect of the art, of their writing, and how they want it to be relayed to the reader. Um, and I think that's getting lost just in general in our culture when it comes to art, right? A lot of folks' initial motivation is either clout or money, um, versus like how can I make something that's special or beautiful. And but you can just tell for him like it was about the details. And I think there's a lot of articles and stuff out there about how like for Watchmen, like the level of detail he put in his script for his artists was just like excruciating. Like it was insane amount of detail. But that just means he gave a shit, right? He wanted it to be perfect. Just like you can tell Miller, he really wanted to make sure that certain things were captured when depicting the city, um, depicting how New York was, how the people lived in New York. And but you just don't hear a lot of modern writers and artists speak this way, or with this level of passion. And so I hope we get more folks, obviously, like that in the future. But like, it's so cool to hear someone talk like this.
half tabloid, half the size of the New York Post. He folded a newspaper in half
Inflating?
twice and said, I think we got something. And that became the format of the comic book. Now, it adapted over the years through strange printing changes to the bizarre form it is now. It's actually 3 inches shorter than it should be. And nobody knows why, except the racks were built that size. That's how dumb the world of comics is. So much could be done if we just knock all those goddamn racks and boxes down and do whatever we wanted to. The 50s had taken their toll on comic books. Everybody took too seriously the rash of censorship. And also, comics were beaten down economically. They weren't selling. Comics were, the time I entered the field, considered strictly child's play. Creatively, they turned around at Marvel Comics first. You wake up one morning and your mom wonders why you're a little moody. And it turns out there's these things going through your veins that are called hormones. And they make your fantasies a little more violent, and they make you look at girls a little differently. And so your fantasies change. Jack Kirby owned that era. He owns that moment in any man's life. And what Stan and Jack did on the Fantastic Four and the Avengers and all Captain America, all those other titles, is really astonishing comic books, and it's some of the best I've ever done. Jack Kirby just explodes with adolescent power. They were an explosion of imagination. They were everything I wanted out of drawing. It wasn't until Will Eisner that I went into a much more nuanced, human look toward things. Several things kept us alive through this period. One was the underground comics, mostly known for the work of Robert Crumb and Richard Corbin. And then the guys in the mainstream, what we call the mainstream, the guys who did the X-Men and Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., like Neil Adams and Jim Steranko. It was only when my generation came into play that we started waking everybody up again. Well, Neil Adams, coming from advertising, brought a photographic reality to comics. And so his anatomy was just utterly beautiful to behold.
That's an awesome shot there. That's one thing too about Miller that's really intriguing is that, right, even though like his vigilantes, right, and like let's say Batman, Marv, and his 300, male characters, right, they're a little bit more on the fantasy side of things, right, a little less realistic. His depictions of women are really like impressive and realistic to an extent. So he has that ability to be like really detailed and really, really smooth in terms of his line art. But like I was always super impressed in how he depicted women. So
And so his anatomy was just utterly beautiful to behold. The first time I ever saw Neil Adams draw the Angel, the X-Men character, and actually saw wings drawn like wings, it was breathtaking. And Neil Adams brought a photorealism to comics that they'd never seen before, and instantly outdated everything before him. Jim Steranko brought a pop culture sensibility. He brought references that from the pulps and from just uncanny sources. Everything that was going on in pop culture, Jim Steranko brought to the fore. The outburst of the independent publishers like Dean Mulaney and Dennis Kitchen, a whole new kinds of comics becoming available. But the rest of us had to keep going in different ways. I mean, I came to New York just really hoping I could make my living doing comic books. I just wanted to tell cool stories about Spider-Man and Daredevil and stuff like that. I didn't have aspirations. I just wanted to do this for a living because drawing was in my blood. I was doing Daredevil when I went to my editor and said that my character who I created, Elektra, had to die. And my editor, Denny O'Neil, said, they'll never go for it. She's more popular than the title character. And I said, well, Jim Shooter's right down the hall. Let me talk to him. And I went into Jim Shooter's office, and all 7 feet of Jim Shooter was sitting there, looking very severe. And I said, Jim, I gotta kill Elektra. And he lowered his head, and then he looked back up and he said, tell me a story, Frank. And I told him exactly what I planned to do, and he said, it's great, do it. I had a powerful ally at the top of the company.
that ties into right my comment earlier that he was willing to take risks. Like even though that may not have been the most popular decision, right, in the bullpen or with management or whatever, like he was willing to, he knew that it was the best for the story, probably would be the most impactful, and he pushed for it. Obviously it paid off. I think that's what eventually led him to like, hey, I want to make, right, Sin City and push for that type of a story.
The old fart came back with a contract with God. What he did was he said, this is where we can go as something that is not temporary, as something that stays on the shelf, stays alive for generations to come. Once I really absorbed it and I gained enough power in the industry, I started working on my series Ronin as an answer to contract with God. And I took in influences from France and Japan and everywhere else to create a reckless piece of work that I'm still very proud of because you can watch the handcuffs come off me. The notion of authorship really was born with a contract with God. And for me, it was with Ronin. And then I looked to apply it to the old standard heroes with Batman when I did The Dark Knight Returns. Because I wanted to create things that would last. They were still stuck on the yellow circle on his chest and so on. And then came up with an excuse dramatically for him to lose his costume. So that he showed up with just a big old bat on his chest, which he's worn ever since. So
I like that comment that he made, and I had the same mindset of like he wanted to make something that would last, right? Not just something that would get him a payday, not just something that was easy or comfortable, but he wanted to do something with the character that would be remembered, right? That was unique and that would stand out. Obviously, it paid off. That's why everyone knows his name.
yeah, part of what I did was trickery. Part of it was having allies in very high places. It's the time I totally internalized the idea that you can throw the pamphlet over your shoulder and say goodbye. And that if your story is 200 pages long, that's great. If it's 148 pages long, that's great. If it's 500 pages long, who cares? It's your story. It was really, for me, the introduction of the sensibility of a novelist rather than a pamphleteer. When Dark Knight came out, when Watchmen came out, people went, wow, this is really scary. This isn't like the world of Superman anymore. Now you walk into a comic shop and you see 70 years of history, whereas before you saw 3 weeks of history. Things have changed now because Eisner stuck his sword in the sand and the rest of us followed up. I liked black and white crime movies when I was growing up, and I love black and white crime movies now. First off, in black and white, they were able to cut the heart of the story. Second, how they used film to tell stories in a way that didn't flood you with color, that in fact didn't use it at all, or with detail. Where a 30-foot room could include only a desk and a lamp and a guy, and you believe it. The thing that people miss is that they went to the heart of darkness, just like Dashiell Hammett did, just like Raymond Chandler did. It crawled inside your skull and showed us all how evil we could be. And then our rare moments of heroism become more celebrated. That's all Sin City is about. It's Jim Thompson's world. It's not Steven Spielberg's world. It's a world where we are driven by ugly impulses and we do good things rarely. And we are defined by them. I remember when I started Sin City, I realized I had to finally figure out how to draw cars. And so I bought tons of little cars from like the Franklin Mint and so on. Learning from Jeff Darrow, the artist of Hardboiled, I realized that the best kind of props were three-dimensional. He taught me that if you want to draw a gun, get one.
See, and that's also great to hear, right? Someone that's like, hey, I want to learn how to draw cars better or guns better. So use the real things or right physical models of different scales as reference material. Right. I love, well, at that time it was just the standard approach, but right, it's so disheartening these days where you come across people that are literally just taking 3D models and just plopping them in. Like it's one thing if you make that 3D model, right? There's a difference, but if you're literally just going into a program and just plopping in a car and like you imagine like you invest in a book or let's just say Sin City, for example. Can you imagine a scenario where you bought it and you're like, man, this is amazing. And then after you find out like, oh, he didn't draw those cars. You'd be like, what? Oh yeah, he just took it from a program and plopped it in. It'd be like, it would take some of that wow factor away. You'd be less impressed, and I don't know, you just would have a different, feeling towards um, that creator or that artist. And so it's just so great to hear about someone that's like, I give a shit so much. Like, no, I'm just gonna go out and, you know, use real life as a reference and perfect my craft even more.
There's lots of fake guns that don't actually fire bullets. One of the things that I feel that's amazing about working in cinema is that there are so few limitations that it becomes dangerous. Working in digital process, for instance, you can do anything. So you have to watch yourself and not do too much. Whereas in comic books, you're limited by the page because the page becomes a statement of itself. Its juxtaposition of pictures and so on is finite. And where a cartoonist's worst enemy is time, because any comic book can be read very quickly. If you know how to slow the reader down, you've mastered the art of comics. Whereas in film, you have absolute command over time. I mean, the viewer has to sit there and watch unless they're going to leave the theater. My way is to lay out everything in advance and then to come in and play with it. Will Eisner put it
There's
best.
some stuff after this
He said it,
interview.
No, he said it best. He said inking is sexy. Because when you bring the brush around, for instance, the shape of a woman, it's as if you're running your hand across it. Drawing is more architectural. You're putting things together. I'm not speaking for Will here, I'm speaking for myself. But inking, he would agree, is more where you feel the window and you feel the woman's breast and you feel all the other glorious things that manifest themselves so deliciously in spirit. What Will Eisner taught me was that you could show what decade you were in, what room you were in, and who you were surrounded
Artistic
by
ones.
with the corner of a table, with a banister or a lamp. I would do it now if I wanted to say somebody was in, say, Los Angeles. I'd do it with a pile of blackberries. It's the same thinking. It's giving you just enough evidence. That is where the job gets harder.
I love. Yeah. I mean, even if you don't want to read the story, just looking at all the art in the Sin City books is just such a treat. Like, you can just feel the darkness of that story and of that city in the image.
Where the job gets harder and more rewarding. I believe that work explodes. A lot of the best stuff that I do is when I'm snapping a brush full of white paint over my wrist and something just splatters all over somebody's face. And matter of fact, I really don't believe in mistakes anymore. I believe that there's nothing but instance. I want to see things go completely wild, and I want to be part of it. I think chaos is a beautiful thing. Allowing entropy to take its course and then to guide it and then to control it as an artist. It's what a potter does. It's what a bricklayer does. It's what a painter does. It's what we all really do. I think the graphic novel is a very pretentious term to describe something that has no good name. I've always been part of pop culture. That's what I enjoy. That's what I enjoy producing. I see nothing demeaning in it. I don't think that a smaller audience is a sign of virtue. Comics are a young form. So is film. So is the novel. If you flip back the pages of history, all these forms are young. Guys like David Lapham and James Tachalka and some of the other guys who are coming up right now, it's just starting to explode. Look at how hungry Hollywood is for comic book ideas right now. And most obviously in Iron Man and Batman and so on, but also in things like Harvey P. Carr's work. It's all changing. We are now standing shoulder to shoulder as sister art forms with film and with literature. I mean, I don't think that there's a big future for, say, the oral heroic poem a la Homer. I think the Nickelodeon's pretty much finished. But comics are just getting started.
So yeah, I think that's a really, really cool interview. There's I think there's one or two documentaries on him that I need to check out, but yeah, just fascinating person to listen to when it comes to comics art. One thing that's cool too about right the film adaptations is for both of the Sin City films as well as 300, I believe. Right, he was a co-director, which is really cool. Like he wanted to be involved in every aspect or everything connected to his works, um, and you know they were all so good that you can tell again his influence was there physically, not just from his books. So yeah, Mikey had asked if I ever draw. I did for a little while. Let's see, in 2022. So when I first kind of got into CG and comics Twitter, say it was late 2021, and it did give me this itch to like try to learn how to draw. Um, and so I did. I had never drew as a kid. I maybe tried to draw a couple times. Excuse me. Just Pokemon stuff, but never took it seriously. And but once I started getting into the idea of making a comic and started getting artwork commissioned by like Corey, for example, I was like, I'll take a swing at it. And so I spent a couple months just like once a week, I would pick a an indie character or a mainstream character and just try to recreate an image. So I wouldn't do any tracing or anything, but I would just look at like a reference photo and just try to recreate it myself. And so I did that with a couple items, and I'd like to someday invest in a really good like tablet or something, and try to become better at it. But for me, it's pain is an issue. Being kind of hunched over, trying to draw was just caused a lot of pain. But I would work through it and get a piece done in a day or two or something. But yeah, for me, it's just my body is just not. I could never be an artist. My body would not let me. And I struggle in general just writing, sitting at a desk for a long time, but it's even worse when you're in a position like trying to draw. But so I tried to recreate the Dale Cam cover for Reaper Destroyer. And then I did just a simple grifter drawing, one of my favorite character designs. And then Cyberfrog, which that's a tough one to do, honestly. Yeah, so that one's not that great. Obviously, I mean none of them are good, but that is a very tough character to recreate. Um, but definitely a challenge and fun to try. And then King Cryptid, that was a fun one to do with the kind of the heavy blacks there. But I had a lot of fun doing that one. But I think I don't know if I may have done one or two other ones, but those were the main ones that I did there. But yeah, I love that GIF. It's a great sarcastic one for people that annoy you on Twitter, as well as this. But yeah, that's the extent of my drawing attempts, I guess you could say. Thank you. Very cool. So headless bourgeois. Says the book of conversations between Miller and Eisner is really worth reading. Deep dive into comic book storytelling theory. Eisner Miller, published by Dark Horse. I'll have to check that out. That definitely sounds great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you. uh, let's see. I'm sure everyone else has thought of it. I can't believe an agitator hasn't showed up in like 3 weeks. Knock on wood. No Niobe, no Wheelers. What's going on? Man, I think they're giving up. I did want to look at just a couple um, quotes from a the Miller and Zack Snyder interview. Obviously, it's really heavy on in text, but there were a couple things I wanted to touch on here. Let's see here. So I'm going to put the link to this in the chat, but this is a really intriguing interview. Um, for people that love Miller but are not a fan of Snyder, I think you'll be disappointed because those two jive very well. They have very similar viewpoints when it comes to heroes, comics, films, which isn't surprising considering they worked on 300 together, and a lot of Zach's inspiration was actually pulled from Miller. But this quote here I really liked from Frank. He said, he's always found that the word deconstruct to be a problematic term because people usually assume that when you deconstruct something, you're tearing it to pieces. And that's only half of what deconstruction really is because it's tearing its essence and then rebuilding it stronger than ever before. I mean, I wrote Batman cynically in order to mock the character. I basically was just looking to get rid of all the shit and restore him to the kind of stature he had in my mind when I was 7 years old. And I do agree with that statement. And that's why I did really enjoy Man of Steel. It showed, and Batman versus Superman, right? They showed the weaknesses, the struggles of Superman, and the faults of Superman in order to build him back up, to make him the ultimate Superman once he comes back to life and he realizes that he can't put so much focus on what people think of him, of what the government wants of him. He needs to be independent and follow his own moral compass and just focus on being who his father envisioned him to be. Um, and they didn't even really deconstruct Superman much, in my opinion, because he wasn't Superman really in Man of Steel. It was the story of him becoming Superman. He doesn't really become Superman until um, the Snyder Cut of the Justice League, right? He's trying to figure out who he is, what he wants to become. So, if anything, they deconstruct him a bit as a man to ultimately turn him into a superhero. And again, that's why I really love Miller's depiction of Batman. Like he said, they kind of shed the shit when it comes to Batman, and then turn him into the ultimate vigilante that's willing to right push the boundaries, break bones, and but also have fun doing it and love doing it. Um, because he stands up to Superman, like he's willing to die for his cause. He truly believes in what he's doing, and to me, that's how Batman should be. He shouldn't be second guessing himself and all of that, which is something we witnessed right with the Nolan verse. Like he should be very firm in his beliefs and his approach. And then Zack Snyder replies and says, The Dark Knight Returns is often credited with revolutionizing how Batman is perceived, but also my takeaway from Dark Knight Returns is exactly the same as you just stated it. Some people would say it's deconstruction, and I understand you might say that, but for me, it was restorative. I'm like, that's my Batman. The The Batman I want to see is that Batman, not the bullshit Batman who's a joke. And then he asked, what were your key influences when creating a darker, older, more psychologically complex Batman? And Miller said the notorious old TV show, the one with Adam West and Burt Ward. I mean, that was a goof. It was basically a snide take on stuff that I remember that I absolutely loved. I loved the comic book characters, and the TV show was constantly telling you how stupid the comic book was. Snyder says, yeah, because it was counterculture against authority, and they sort of saw Batman as the man. And so I just felt like they were making the man out to be sort of an idiot. And Frank says, yeah, so without question, I was rejecting that damn show more than anything with when he did Dark Knight Returns. Snyder says, you were like, literally, this is the opposite. The guy is the opposite of what you think he is. Yeah, the guy is no joke. And that's a good way to put it with Miller's Dark Knight, right? He was brilliant. He thought outside the box. Um, he had his shit together mentally in terms of like believing what is right, what is wrong, knowing right that the government can't be trusted, that he needs to follow his instinct, even if that means going against Superman. Versus a uncertain Batman that is constantly messing up because he's afraid that he's going to cross a line, or he's afraid that of what society or the government might think of him, for example. And then Snyder says, one of the things that you do in Dark Knight Returns with the voiceover, or right, the internal monologue, is in the sort of very specific language that he uses in combat and how he analyzes the combat that he's in. You go like, okay, this guy is 100% more complicated in his combat style even than you can imagine. And that was what I was commenting on, right? Like his inner monologue, like you really get into the mind of Batman and understand what he's thinking, what he's planning. But this is where, yeah, people criticize Snyder, but you can tell Snyder is extremely artistic and detail oriented. That he's even willing to capture this, realize it, and analyze it, and then put this stuff into his films. Miller says, I look at Batman as the self-made superhero. Bruce Wayne made himself Batman by studying, training, and exploring. Extraordinary feats come easily to Superman. He can fly, and then the rest. I mean, just in terms of Superman, it's like you think you can do it. He can fly, for God's sake. Whereas Batman needs a goddamn car. I enjoy an effort. Yep. Snyder says, the one thing I really loved about the way you did Superman also was he's sort of a tool in the US government. Yep. But the Superman, also in your version, is self aware. He knows what he's doing because everyone's like, oh, he's like a big Boy Scout. Well, it's like, no, he understands the political complexity of the whole thing. And he's just done the math and goes, look, this is where the only way we're able to exist is if we do it this way. And then Miller says Superman is an apologia worrywart, and he's concerned with keeping the world from blowing itself up. Batman's this Dion, he's a wordsmith, Dionysian character who's out for blood, and they're perfect opposites in that Batman is the reckless ego and Superman is the fearful superego. I like that. Snyder says that's cool. I really love it because I love Superman is in charge of keeping this in a lot of ways. The children are tearing the preschool down, they're setting it on fire, and they're out of their minds. And he's really just trying to wrangle us so that we don't kill ourselves. And our Batman's like, no, that's what it is to be alive, That's cool. And he says Batman is the happier character. And Snyder says, yeah, 100%. Miller says he wanted to abolish the pouty Batman. Yeah, I'm glad he did. Yeah, very, very cool interview. again, it's just cool to hear artists and visionaries talk about these properties and getting ahead of one another, and you see how they align, and you can see where Snyder was definitely inspired by Miller. And then they, obviously go into talking about 300, which they worked on together. And yeah, they just cover a lot of different topics, and they go in talking about mythology and all that as well. But yeah, very, very cool interview. Recommend people check that out. And then yeah, just do a quick little recap of some of the projects that are available. Share screen here. So first, let's take a look. Make sure that everybody goes and takes a look at Punk and give it a shot at backing. I guess this closes out. Let's see, I got to refresh, don't I? Closes out in 6 hours, so definitely let's get him over that 15,000 mark. I don't know if he's going in demand or not. Hopefully he will, but make sure you give this a look see and consider backing it. And again, he's one of those guys that's active, promotes other people. So let's definitely give him some support. We also have Cecil's Cash Grab 2. So don't miss out on that. Let's try to get that over 100,000. That'll be it's already the highest funded campaign on Fund My Comic, but let's get this to be the first campaign over 100,000. Where is that? Let's just let's browse here. Yeah, Phenomenon number 2. That's got 16 days to go. Gonna have to get Patrick on here so we can push that here soon. But we need to get that over 5,000. That's what he raised on uh, Phenomenon number 1, which was his second campaign. But he's been growing campaign after campaign, so let's definitely get him some support and get that out there. You also have the Maniac. He's uh, Johnny Rockets is very close to $1,000 there. We did showcase Outlaw Nights number 2 by Ben Buseler. He's on all 3 crowdfunding sites, but let's try to get this up to $500 here and Fund My Comic. We do have Tom Tuttle's 7 Amens Before Sundown. He's very, very close to 7,000. That's been doing very well, so check that out. Yeah, as mentioned there, Cecil's Cash Grab getting close to 82,000. And then the other one, let's go to Indiegogo here. Do we have Silence Do Good, which I'm not sure if he's going in demand, but I know the main 60 days or whatever closes out really soon here. He's going to have a big closeout party for that. So make sure you check that out. I did a review of that during a BA Recommends segment. Um, I don't know, maybe a couple months ago, but really, really enjoyed the first issue. I'm going to be picking up this graphic novel, which has the first 3 issues. I think it's at least like 70 so pages. But again, Salty Draws is a guy that does his own line art, his own inking, possibly. Not sure if he does letters or if he has Eric Weathers doing them, but some fantastic art in this. So let's get him over 11,000. I mean, this should be over 15,000. He's got 9 days left. So yeah, late next week he'll be closing. So make sure you check this out. Pick up the Dan Lawless variant. Um, Honestly, this has got enough great covers to pick up a bundle. But yeah, 4 great covers. So definitely check this out. And then we also have Immortal Rising too over on Fund My Comics. So make sure to check that out. So yeah, I appreciate everyone being here. I want to do something a little bit different and just kind of focus on a specific creator, dive in more towards kind of discussing artwork, storytelling. Um, we'll probably do the same thing on more, maybe in a couple weeks. You know, might not be as exciting of a topic, but I love talking about it. And I know some of the other folks in the audience do as well. So yeah, we'll do one on Moore, and then eventually do one on Wolfman as well, because those three of my favorites. Um, and then yeah, other thing I need to put together. Maybe we'll do it in May. I need to do a panel promotion stream. Try to get folks in. Um, Definitely need to bring on more guests, and I think there's just not many. There's not many panel promotion streams like there used to be. I mean, Shane and Mandy are still doing it, which are fantastic. You have, Patrick, Comicsgate Commandos that are bringing on people. Katie obviously brings on several people at a time, but I'd like to, contribute, get some folks on the stream, give them a chance to pitch, right? To do the things that we talk about here, and hopefully, you know, bring all the audience that would typically view Pimp My Comic, for example, and get more eyes on some of these campaigns, and let's build campaigns. I think, you know despite all the division and whatever the splintering that's happened, whether it's CG or in indies in general, I think what we need more than anything right now is more panel and more promotion streams. I do have a feeling Comicsgate Live will come back. I do think there's enough, at least from like EVS's perspective, right? I think there are enough passionate and trustworthy creators right now to at least have one once a month. And I do think that will also inspire more people to have more promotion streams, and just kind of reignite that, because I think what we need now more than ever is like, hey, let's show how we can get funding up. Let's show that we can get multiple 10, 20, $30,000 campaigns, and then have some dark horses, right? Up here where it's like, hey, whether it's a new creator or not, but this is a fantastic looking book, and boom, we have a $100,000 campaign, and then boom, another $100,000 campaign to show that, like, hey, we still have a large audience. We can still raise the funds. We just need to, right, bring the troops together more, and just reignite the flame a bit. I think it's possible. I'm going to try to do my part, and then yeah, I'll be also looking to promote my own sign up page, hopefully here in a couple months, and get on people's channels and be doing the same thing. So obviously, the more channels that are doing the stuff, the better it is for everybody. So yeah, try to put that together this month. I also need to try to bring on more guests just to help kind of bring more energy to the conversations, and you know kind of broaden the discussions as well. So that's something I need to try to do. Maybe eventually I will co-host or something too, to help you know energize the audience and bring more people in. But for now, I'm just going to talk about the stuff that I'm interested in, and take it from there. And then hopefully I'll have some art to show in the near future. Get people excited about the first Vigilantes Creed book, which is yet to be. The title has not been fully decided. The line artist inker, that is set in stone. That'll be announced in the near future. Colorist is narrowed down. We'll be getting there in the near future, but yeah, excited to start showcasing that. Start talking about that. Maybe have a monthly draw stream with my artist. And really focus on talking about the art, and how we're going through the scripting process and all of that. So you know do some light, right, drama talk like we do, go over some Twitter stuff here and there, but also showcase art, focus on creators, broader topics, and stuff like we did today. So appreciate everybody being here, and yeah, had a lot of fun. Definitely spread the word if you don't mind. Get this out there. I think more, folks that are really passionate about just talking about comics and creators would enjoy the discussion that we had, and that interview. So yeah, everybody have a great rest of your night. Have a great weekend. Thank you, and God bless. Take care.